Okay, so in this lecture, I want to talk about just war theory. We'll start talking about it in this lecture. We'll finish it in the next. There's rather a lot to just war theory, so we'll take a while to cover. Remember I said, in the last lecture, you might be a utilitarian about war, but that just seems to make it too easy to go to war, and it makes it too easy to do all sorts of stuff in war that we would hope, I think, find unacceptable, right? You can go to war for aggressive reasons in utilitarianism if the consequences are good enough. You can do all sorts of horrible things. Generally, you shouldn't do stuff like target civilians, but if you tell me a story where the consequences are good enough, the utilitarian would be okay with it. And pacifism, it's the other side of the coin. Pacifism, well, never go to war, but clearly in the real world, that's not going to be all that realistic position, right? You face people who aren't as principled as you are, people who might use force. What are you going to do if you can't respond by using violence on your own side, right? So just war theory is a theory that says sometimes it's acceptable to go to war, sometimes it's acceptable to use force, but it puts very strict limits on when we can acceptably go to war and on what we can do in a war. So just war theory allows war. It says sometimes it's morally acceptable to fight war, but it'll put very strict limits on when that is, when it's acceptable to actually go to war. And it'll also put really strict limits on what we can do in fighting a war, what kinds of weapons and tactics we can use and who we can target. Okay, so let's get a little more deeply into just war theory. So the first thing to notice about just war theory is that just war theory is based on sort of deontological moral theory. It's not utilitarian. It's based on this sort of rules-based theory that says, well, there are certain things you can never do, right? And now, traditionally, the historical forms of just war theory were based on a moral theory called natural law theory. I'm not going to talk about natural law theory. For our purposes, you can... Natural law theory was what was used to develop just war theory, but I think you can think of just war theory as a more or less Kantian approach to war. Kantianism seems to work just as well, and it seems to fit with Kantian restrictions. Okay, so you might be saying to yourself, well, how in the world could Kantianism allow for war, right? Kantianism says don't use people as mere means. If you fight a war, you're going to be killing people. Aren't you killing people as a means to accomplish some kind of end, right? Your end is maybe something good. It's to stop a slaughter, or it's to defend yourself. But even if it's a good end, how could you do something that will kill people and not violate this Kantian restriction on using people as mere means? Well, the idea behind just war theory is that you are allowed to defend yourself when others attack you. Kantianism would allow this. If someone is literally going to kill you, unless you kill them, then Kantianism would allow you to kill them if you had to. And the thought here, there's two parts of this. One is just, partially it's just that your intention more than killing the other person is that you want to save yourself. You want to defend yourself. You wouldn't kill them unless they put you in a position where it's you or them. And that's the second thought of this allowance for self-defense, that Kantianism would allow us to use force against others, even kill them in self-defense. And the thought is, well, look, you didn't create this situation. They put you in a situation where you have to use violence, even up into killing them, to defend yourself. If you could save your own life without using violence, you would. They've created a situation where you have to possibly even kill them to defend yourself. So the idea is that even though you're using force, you're not acting in a way that fails to show respect for rational beings. Why? They've created the situation, they've forced you into it. And so Kantianism, for the same reasons that it allows self-defense on a personal level, it will allow going to war in self-defense or defense of others for the same reason. But it's going to put really serious restrictions on it. There are certain things, according to just war theory, you can never do. We'll talk about those. Okay, so remember I said in the last set of slides, the last lecture, there are really two questions I think you can ask about the morality of war. When is it morally acceptable to go to war? What can we do in a war? Just war theory, it was developed in the Middle Ages when every educated person wrote in Latin, so it talks about this in Latin terms. Just war theory is divided into two components, jus ad bellum and jus in bello. And this is just a fancy way of saying jus ad bellum is about when is it morally acceptable to go to war. That's the question it's trying to answer. What can we do in war? That's jus in bello. So we will talk about each of these sets of conditions first. We will not get to jus in bello in this lecture. We'll only talk about jus ad bellum. Okay, so I want to talk about the conditions of just war theory. And one thing to be very clear on with these conditions is that every single one of these has to be satisfied before you can go to war. You have to have just cause, proper authority, it has to be a last resort, there has to be a legitimate chance of success, and it has to be proportional. If any of these aren't satisfied, then it's not acceptable to go to war. You can't go to war. Now you guys might notice from the reading that Jenkins talks about one other condition that I don't talk about, which is right intention. Main reason for this is I just don't feel that right intention you really need to talk about it. I think right intention is just part of just cause. So we can leave it out. I think we can cover it. I think just cause really covers it. You don't need to talk about right intention. So I'll talk about these other five. I'll go into more detail into what each of them means. Okay, so what does it mean to have just cause? Now, one thing I should admit is that I've been talking about just war theory as though it were just one theory. There are actually different versions of just war theory. They're kind of a family of theories. They'll say similar things. But there are different versions, and different versions of just war theory are more or less strict. And so the strict, one of the ways the strictness comes out is in when they will say it is okay to go to war. And so the strictest forms of just war theory say self-defense is the only just cause, the only reason you can have for going to war. What this means is you can only go to war if your country is attacked or another country has made it clear that they're going to attack. Now, there are less strict versions of just war theory, though. And most people, the really strict version that only allows for self-defense, they find that too strict. The less strict versions will allow for war in defense of others who are unfairly threatened or attacked. So, example, when Germany invaded Poland at the beginning of World War II without cause, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Most versions of just war theory would say, well, this is allowable. Why? Others were unfairly attacked, unfairly threatened. You can act to defend them, right? Again, think of self-defense. If someone was coming at you with an axe and was going to kill you, and you had a gun, almost all of us would say it's acceptable to shoot that person, right? But if the same person was running toward another innocent person with an axe, that person didn't have an axe, but you had a gun, again, we would say it's acceptable to shoot them. The same thought behind just cause. If another country attacks a country without cause and is killing people, is threatening people, you can use force, you can use violence to defend those innocent people. So most forms of just war theory will allow for this. Defense of others other innocent people, other countries who are unfairly attacked or threatened. Final thing, even less strict forms of just war theory will allow for war to uphold international norms. This is more controversial. This is the most sort of permissive forms of just war theory. But the idea is, if a country's breaking international law, that might be a reason to go to war. Gets more controversial as you move down the list. Most everybody will say defense of others is a good reason to go to war, even if your own country's not directly threatened. Everyone will say if your own country is directly imminent threat or attacked, that's a just cause to go to war. What's not just causes to go to war are things like revenge against another country or, some kind of economic advantage. You couldn't go to war because you feel like some country has insulted ours. And yes, in the Middle Ages and even earlier, kings and other leaders would go to war for reasons that were that stupid. You also couldn't go to war for some kind of economic advantage, right? If going to war would make all our groceries way cheaper, that's not a good reason to go to war. Self-defense, defense of others, or upholding international laws, those are the reasons you can go to war, and the more strict versions might not even allow all of those. So very strict on what counts as a just cause. Okay, so then we come to the proper authority condition. And this one, I like the Jenkins article. I think he does a very good job of explaining just war theory, especially in that he only has 1,000 words, which is not a lot. But he doesn't do a good job with proper authority. And so what proper authority means is not just anyone or anything can go to war. Traditionally, only legitimate states have proper authority to go to war. And you want to be clear the way that just war theory uses the term states. It does not mean a state like Texas or Alabama or Virginia. What it means are nations. Only a recognized nation can declare war, just war theory says. The U.S. can go to war. Canada can go to war. Germany can go to war. Russia can go to war. You can't go to war, you can't declare war if you're not a legitimate nation. So what this means is that not just any group could claim that it has some sort of reason to go to war and go to war, right? A group of random weirdos who live in Idaho can't declare themselves the Republic of Eastern Idaho and go to war, right? I can't declare I can't say, well, I have these grievances, I, Sam Duncan, so I'm going to go to war with these other people, right? So why does just war theory put this condition in place? Well, just war theory is very clear that violence and killing are bad things, and it wants to put a limit on who and what can use violence, on who and what can kill. And so it puts this limit on nations, on states, because it says, well, countries already, they use force against their own citizens. We already recognize that countries have this legitimate, authority to use force to protect their citizens. I mean, what else are they doing when they send people to jail? And we say, well, proper authority is an extension of that. Now, I want to be clear, though, of the conditions of just war theory, proper authority, this idea that only nations can wage war, is one of the most controversial. Even people who like the other four conditions will push back on this one sometimes. Well, why is that? Now, first we want to be clear what it means. Now, proper authority doesn't say that only nations can only go to war with other nations. If Al-Qaeda or ISIS attacks the U.S., we can respond with military force. We can respond to groups that aren't nations. what proper authority says is it's only nations that can use force in that way, though, right? They don't necessarily have to be fighting other nations, but nations are the only things that can legitimately go to war. Okay, so why is this controversial? Well, it's controversial because it seems too restrictive. Think about stateless groups who might have legitimate reasons for wanting to fight. Maybe the state is killing them. Maybe their rights aren't being respected. And just war theory just says, no, you guys can't ever go to war. You're not a nation. You would need a nation to go to war. You'd need a recognized state. Just war theory says you just can't go to war. It would also seem, even when the government is horribly unjust, people can't rebel and overthrow it in just war theory. Why? The government is a legitimate nation. You as a group of rebels aren't, right? Again, we don't, we want to limit this, but it seems sometimes if the government is being incredibly unjust, either to some group of people or just to everyone, why say as a matter of course, just categorically, never ever can they go to war? So for that reason, people will challenge this proper authority condition. Now, to be clear, I'll move on in a second. I mean, there are good reasons for this property authority condition because we don't just want any wacko or group of wackos to claim, I have some legitimate reasons, so I want to go to war. That would be awful. That would be anarchy. That's a recipe for crazy terrorist group after crazy terrorist group doing all kinds of stuff. But again, even though there's good reason for it, some people will think proper authority is too restrictive. So again, proper authority, this idea, the only things that can legitimately go to war are nations, countries. Individuals, even groups of individuals, if they're not a recognized country, they can't go to war. They don't satisfy the conditions of traditional just war theory. So, just war theory also says that war has to be a last resort. Before you can go to war, you have to try every nonviolent means that has any real chance of success. And if nonviolent means have a chance of success, you have to keep trying them. You can't go to war. Now, this doesn't mean, at a certain point, when Hitler, say, invaded Poland, it was very clear, well, maybe if we just keep asking nicely, he'll stop. No, of course not, right? By this point, it had been shown, negotiation isn't going to work. But again, you can't jump straight to war with just war theory. You have to try negotiation. You have to try non-violent means. So as an aside here, and I think this will illustrate just war theory a little better, just war theory has been very influential in the Catholic Church. And if you think back to the First Iraq War, many of you might not remember this, but if you do, you'll remember that Pope Benedict was pretty strongly opposed to the U.S. going to war when it did. And one of the reasons for this was that Pope Benedict did not think that we had satisfied this last resort condition. Our reasons, George W. Bush's reasons for going to war were that we wanted to make sure that the Iraqis did not have nuclear and or biological or chemical weapons. And so there were UN inspections going on at the time, and we said, or the Bush administration said, well, those aren't going to work. We know they're not going to work. We're not going to, we're going to give the Iraqis this ultimatum that Hussein has to leave power because we know that inspections aren't going to work to make sure they're disarmed. Well, I think you could legitimately say, well, you haven't given these peaceful inspections enough chance. You're saying you don't think they'll work, but for war to be a last resort, you'd have to know they won't work. You'd have to give them more of a chance. So another interesting thing here is this last resort condition rules out so-called preventative war. And what a preventative war is you think to yourself, well, this other country isn't currently attacking us. They're not even directly threatening us. They haven't threatened to do anything. But they're a rival. You know, we are at odds with them. We're butting heads with them on a bunch of stuff. Sooner or later, we're going to go to war with them. It's better for us to fight a war now. So we'll go on and fight the war now because it would be bad to fight the war in the future. Just war theory rules that out. And if you think back to this if you think back to the self-defense condition, it's obvious why it rules it out, right? You couldn't shoot your neighbor because, well, me and him have had a few arguments, and I know he has a gun, and one of these days he might shoot me, right? No, of course not, right? He would actually have to be holding a gun at you or otherwise legitimately threatening your life before you could respond in kind, right? Just war theory, same way. The other country has to be attacking or threatening to attack, we're going to attack if you don't do this. That satisfies just war theory. If someone threatens you in this way, it can't just be, well, we think a war is likely. It's better for us to fight it now, right? Preventative war of that sort is ruled out on just war theory. Now, you want to be careful, though, because what just war theory might allow is so-called preemptive war. Well, what's the difference between preemptive war and preventative war? Well, preemptive war is when you have every reason to think that the other country is going to attack you. They're getting ready to actually attack. It's not just, well, we think we might fight with these guys. It's that you know that they are getting ready to launch an attack. If they are massing tanks and troops on your border, you don't actually wait till they attack. You can attack before they do because you know they're getting ready to attack. I mean, think of it this way, right? If someone rolls up to a bank with a stocking over his head and a shotgun in the car with him and starts to walk into the bank, has a sack of money with him, or has a sack for his money, the police could arrest him before he actually goes in the bank and pulls a shotgun at anybody, right? Why? Because they know what he's about to do. It's very clear. In the same way, if a country is very clearly planning to attack another one, the country that is under threat doesn't have to wait to respond. But, again, you couldn't arrest somebody just because, say, they did a Google search about robbing a bank, or they talked a lot about robbing a bank. You can't arrest them because you think there's a good chance they will rob a bank. You can only arrest them when they're getting ready to do it. In the same way, you can fight another country if they are about to attack you. You can't fight them if you just think, well, in the future, it's likely they will attack us. Preventative war, you fight the war because you think it's likely that you'll come into conflict with this other country in the future. Better for you to fight now, but they're not planning to attack or anything like it at the moment. Preemptive war, you have very good reason to think they're going to attack. You don't have to wait until they actually do. Chance of success. In one sense, this is a very easy one. You actually have to be able to accomplish your aims in the war. If the other country, if what you aim to accomplish, if you know you would lose, you can't fight the war. I mean, that might be a hard pill to swallow, but there's a pretty clear reason for it, right? Just war theory will say, well, human life is precious. You can't go to war if you have no chance of success because you're basically throwing people's lives away. That's not allowed. You can't just get people killed if you can't accomplish your goals. Even if they're good goals, even if you've been unfairly threatened, some other country demands that, You turn over some small piece of your territory, they have no right to that territory. Well, if in fighting them you would definitely lose, even though you satisfy the other conditions of just war theory, you shouldn't. That would be throwing lives away for no good reason. Now, but there's one other interesting part of the chance of success condition. The aims in war have to be clearly defined, and it has to be clear when they are achieved. We want clear war aims. Why? Because we want to know when they've been achieved and we can stop fighting. Remember, just war theory thinks war is a very bad thing. War might be the lesser of two evils in some cases, but war is bad, killing is bad, and you want to put as much of a limit on war as you can and on killing as you can, and you want the war to be over as soon as possible. You don't want some open-ended excuse for endless fighting, for endless killing, if you're a just war theorist. And the just war theorist will say, if your war aims aren't clear, that gives people an open-ended excuse for killing and violence. You need clear war aims, and it needs to be and you need to be able to say when you've achieved them. So for this reason, just war theorists would not like talk of, say, a war on terror. Why not? Think about that for a second. Why would talk of a war on terror not meet this chance of success condition? Well, it's just vague, right? What is it to fight a war on terror, and when have you accomplished your aims? Either it's just, we don't even know what it would be to fight a war on terror, or if we define the aims in such a way, well, we win the war on terror when there's no more terrorism, well, then obviously we can't accomplish those aims. You need clear aims in a war, and it needs to be the case that you can accomplish them. Now, to be clear, just war theorists wouldn't like talk of a war on terror. They would be perfectly fine with, say, the U.S. going to war with Al-Qaeda in response to the 9/11 attacks, right? They have attacked us. They are threatening future attacks. Waging war to deprive Al-Qaeda of a sanctuary in Afghanistan. Well, those are aims that have a clear chance of success. It's clear when we've accomplished that. Just war theory would be fine with that. But we're attacked, so we are declaring a war on terror. Just war theory would say that's unacceptable. Why? Because it's not clear what success looks like, and on some ways of defining it, success is impossible, right? You will never stamp out terror. So clear aims that you can actually achieve. If the aims are unclear, that does not meet this chance of success condition. If the aims are clear, but you're definitely going to lose, or they're just impossible to bring about otherwise, that also fails the chance of success condition. The final condition of just war theory is so-called proportionality. And proportionality is just a fancy way of saying the war must be worth it. What does it mean for the war to be worth it? Well, what it means for the war to be worth it is the bad consequences of not fighting the war or the good consequences of fighting must actually outweigh the likely evil consequences of actually fighting a war. If you wage a war, people are going to die, people are going to be killed. It has to be the case that if you didn't wage it, things would be even worse. I'll give you guys an example of a war that satisfies this and a war that probably doesn't, right? So take World War II. Definitely satisfies this proportionality condition. As horrible, as bloody as World War II was, what would be the consequences of letting Hitler win? He was not going to stop with the Holocaust. He had plans to just murder large parts of the population of Poland and Russia. He was going to conquer other countries and do the same thing he was doing places he'd already conquered. Millions, hundreds of millions would have died. As bad as World War II was, fighting to stop the Nazis was worth it. It satisfies this proportionality condition. Here is an example of a case of going to war that wouldn't satisfy it, though, right? I'll give you actually guys a couple examples. So, the North Koreans have no big shock, even before the present, they were prone to very bad behavior. And at one point after the Korean War, there was a border dispute. They actually murdered several American soldiers with hatchets, right? They chopped them to death. The U.S. responded in a very moderate way. We did not go to war over this. Why not? Well, because it wouldn't satisfy this proportionality condition, right? We go to war so North Korea won't, occasionally kill our soldiers. Well, what's going to happen if we go to war with North Korea? Hundreds of thousands of people will die. Millions of people might die. Given the North Koreans' alliances with the Chinese, it might even turn into a nuclear war. Yes, we would otherwise have a good reason to go to war, but the proportionality condition not satisfied. Another example, wouldn't satisfy the proportionality condition. During the Cold War, the Hungarians rebelled. They tried to throw the Soviets out. The Soviets bring in a lot of troops and basically just crush this Hungarian rebellion. Now, a lot of people were upset that Eisenhower, who was the president of the U.S., didn't intervene. But again, intervention would not be proportional, right? We might have been able to prevent the Soviets from, crushing this Hungarian rebellion, but how would they have responded? Well, it would have started World War III. Could have very well led to a nuclear war that kills everybody. Even if it didn't, hundreds of millions of people will die. The evil of fighting this war would be worse than the evil it's trying to prevent. So hopefully you guys understand the conditions of jus ad bellum. Next lecture we will start on jus in bello, what you can and can't do in actually fighting a war once it's declared.